Well, hello and welcome to the Speakeasy. My name is Paul Feasy, and as always, I'm joined by...
Hello, I'm Glen Scrivener.
And Nate Morgan Locke.
Well, tonight we are talking about events that have unfolded over the last few weeks in Ukraine, and for a number of weeks Russia has been massing military forces along the border of Ukraine, but Russian President Vladimir Putin assured Ukraine and other nations they were simply carrying out military exercises. However, a few days ago Russia launched a devastating attack on Ukraine, a democracy of 44 million people, and its forces are now on the outskirts of the capital of Kiev. Putin has stated that the reason for this is that Russia could not feel safe, develop and exist because of what he claimed was a constant threat from modern Ukraine. Claimed his goal was to protect people subjected to bullying and genocide and to aim for the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. This has been condemned as Russian propaganda, as Ukraine is a democratically elected government and is even governed by a Jewish president, Volodymyr Zelensky, who many of us have probably seen quite a bit of in the last few days. And the Ukrainian people have responded with heavy resistance to the Russian military incursions, and other nations around the world have levelled heavy sanctions against Russia, cutting off its access to financial transactions as well as freezing assets. And they've also been providing weaponry for the Ukrainians. We've also seen many Ukrainian families attempting to flee the country and begin to flood into other parts of Europe. And it was reported in the last few days that Putin has placed Russian nuclear forces on high alert, something that Western nations have taken quite seriously. As Putin had previously said, whoever tries to hinder us or threaten our country or our people should know that Russia's response will be immediate and will lead you to consequences you have never faced in your history. So it's been quite a week of events, really. I don't think any of us... Well, I was going to say, I don't think any of us saw this coming, but maybe we did see it coming. I don't know. What do people think?
Well, yeah, the reaction has been universally kind of one of shock. How can this be? Which is often the response of affluent Westerners when events that would not take anyone else by surprise down through history around the world happen. It's always the case when the bomb goes off in the third world. You know what people do. People cry, people wail, there's mourning in the streets. When the bomb goes off in the West, what is the look on everyone's face? It's shock. How can this happen to me? How can this happen now? And tragically, this is kind of the way things have always been, really. Plato and Aristotle would used to talk about just wars, but one of the things that you could do in order to wage a just war is if you wanted some more slaves, that was a just cause for war. Also, if you liked stuff, if you wanted somebody else's stuff, that could also be a just cause for war. Yeah. Or, Cicero, for the Romans, again, they had a just war tradition that was sort of pre-Christian. But again, if you wanted to bring people into the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, then of course you could go to war and you could civilize the barbarians and bring them, because they're idiots, right? And so but you bring them into the civilization of Rome at the point of a sword. And so much of Putin's speech last week sort of reminded me of that kind of just war. Ukraine, you've always kind of been like one of us, and we're going to make sure that happens, at the point of a gun. And so it's a very kind of pre-Christian idea of a just cause for war that is to enlarge your borders and bring people into the Pax Romana. Often Moscow's been called the third Rome. Constantinople was the second Rome. Moscow's the third Rome, and it's kind of this Orthodox Rome. And Putin speaks in spiritualized language about extending the borders and bringing people in. So tragically, this is the way the world has been down through the ages.
But I suppose most people haven't, when they've thought about this, gone back to the Pax Romana, right? Most people are saying, "Oh, this is like Hitler and the Nazis in the Second World War," and so they've seen that because this is the first time there's been. It's very difficult to define what is this the first time there has been a military conflict in Europe with these groups of countries or something since the Second World War.
Yeah. Leaving out Yugoslavia and
forgetting about all the others.
Yeah, that's right.
But people are feeling as though this is since the end of the Second World War, this is now the first time nuclear powers are in armed conflict and
Yes.
Russia's invasion of
And they both have
Ukraine.
McDonald's and
Yes.
all those
Well,
sorts of
that was-
things.
yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah.
they both have Domino's. But a lot of people, it brings it closer to home
Yeah.
when you see a kind of a column of tanks, and behind it there is a Domino's. And it feels like, oh, so war is a thing.
Yeah.
War's actually a thing. And I think that takes everybody by surprise. You know, outside the church, it takes people by surprise. Inside the church, you get people saying, oh, because there's wars and rumors of wars, it must be the end times. When that is precisely the opposite of what Jesus says in Mark 13. You know, there will be wars and rumors of wars. This isn't the end, people.
Yeah.
But also, we are kind of, culturally, we are in sort of perpetual shock mode.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know how... if you just take it back to 2016, right? You do Brexit and Trump. These were like, oh, my goodness, can you believe it's happened? Oh, this has happened. Like, this is totally ridiculous and unprecedented. Who ever thought this would happen? Then you get to 2020 and the pandemic, and now we've got to the point where Russia is invading Ukraine.
Yeah.
And Putin is suggesting that there could be nuclear consequences if NATO countries sort of join in. So it does feel as though we've had a series of shocks to the system culturally, and yet we still seem surprised.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
It seems quite weird.
I should say that as we talk about this, there's a good crowd of you watching. It's great to have you with us. Please do let us know your thoughts down in the comments there, because we will be kind of monitoring that, and we will kind of hopefully be able to engage with that as well. Yeah, I mean, the issue of kind of how surprised people are, I think is a bit like you said. It's in some ways, I mean, I said to you earlier, I didn't feel that surprised by it because it's. I think we've talked so much about kind of the idea that we've lived in this blip. Like I think when we talk about the COVID, about the pandemic, we said the time without suffering and the time of comfort, that is the blip in history.
Yeah.
I think it has taken a lot of people by surprise because we've had sort of 75 years of relative peace. My generation, I'm 35, so I don't remember the Soviet Union at all, really. I mean, obviously it was still there, but it was in its crumbling by then. So people of my age and younger probably don't have the idea that just war can just be breaking out at any point. But I think it didn't surprise me so much because I guess I've always had this thing in my head that, well, of course it could happen. I mean, you used a good phrase earlier today, Nate, when you said, in some sense people thought maybe we've grown out of this.
Yeah.
The idea that nations would invade other nations for land. We're a bit beyond that now because we're so civilized.
Yeah.
And that seems to have been almost kind of Western modern day pride, to think that we're above all these things. But I think it's always been there. And you see, once Putin... Putin obviously has decided to do this. Just shows you how easy it is for things to change very, very quickly. So
Yeah. And so we thought that pestilence was a thing of the past, and we thought that war was a thing of the past. And we think that famine is a thing of the past, but I think with energy prices going up and recession, kind of waves of recession are about to hit, I think we're about to see that, we're living in biblical times. We're not living in end times. We're living in biblical times, which is just war, famine, and pestilence are the norm. And the bubble has been the little slice of time that we've lived in. I was thinking today. I was born as close to the election of Adolf Hitler as I am to my own birth. Like we are as close to my birth as my birth was to the election of Adolf Hitler. Which, as Christoph Keating has said in the comments, Hitler equals the devil, and World War II is the national religion. So every time we have an enemy, they are the new Hitler. That's the 21st century just war. If your enemy is Hitler. So on that topic of just war, people like Augustine started to frame, the true just causes for war. And you can't just go and nick people's stuff, and you can't just go because you want some slaves, and you can't just go because you want to bring people into the Pax Romana. Augustine, said, if your goal is peace, if you don't start it, and if your goal is peace, and if you don't execute prisoners, what were some of the other stipulations for a just war, then you can sort of have one. What's interesting about the just war tradition is it's pretty much never had an experience of a just war. Like there's pretty much never been a war that actually ticks the 5 boxes that Augustine has. Maybe World War II is your best shot at it, and yet the bombing of Dresden or dropping of bombs on Nagasaki. I mean, how do you justify any of that kind of stuff? So we kind of cling on to the just war tradition. The only alternative, really, to the just war tradition. Well, there are 2 alternatives to the just war tradition. One is the Putin route, which is just like, I always kind of liked Ukraine. I wanted it for myself. So that's there's the realist position where you just go and take stuff because you can. But the pacifist position is a really particularly sort of Christian position. And I guess the problem with the pacifist position is you then rely on other people to bear the brunt of your scruples. I don't want to defend the country against a Putin who's coming in to do evil. And I've got all the time in the world for the pacifist position, but I guess at the stage when the tanks are rolling in, it can be a very principled thing, the non-violent resistance kind of thing. But you also rely on other people bearing the brunt of your moral position, which is often that's the tricky part of being the pacifist. Yeah. So it's really tricky. But what we've seen in someone like Zelensky is we've seen a kind of a hero coming to the fore to stand up against an evildoer.
Well, I was just thinking, I really want to talk about Zelensky. That's been sort of for many people this weekend, I think he's been the focus of, attention. But on the pacifist position, do people take that from? You can see how that works at a national level, where you sort of go, okay, I don't believe our country should go to war, and I don't feel that I should be forced to, sort of bear arms in defense of my nation. But how does the pacifist position work out in sort of smaller spheres? Mm-hmm. So like the family, I mean, after a while you sort of start to think there's pacifism, and then there's lack of, you're not taking your responsibilities. Can you be a pacifist when it comes to the family? I mean, I'm just on a question now. I don't know.
Yeah, because people always bring up, okay, so the bad guy is breaking into your house. There's blood on the doorknob, and he's about to take your wife and kids. What do you do? Yeah. Be a man and sort of stand up for it. I find it quite humbling to read the biography of the autobiography of Stephen Lungu. Have you read Out of the Black Shadows?
Yeah, I read it a long time ago, but he was converted in... Was it Uganda?
Uganda, I think.
And he goes with a weapon
with bombs
to a Christian revival meeting,
a tent meeting. Yeah,
for the express purpose of blowing it up, and then
he gets converted.
But dang it!
And as he comes forward to give his life to Jesus, he also gives the weapons to the front, which would have been quite disturbing, I think. Yeah. And then his life is utterly turned around, but. The other people in his gangs do not like it. And he tells story after story, actually, people coming after him, people coming after his family, and him praying and finding non-violent ways of resisting evildoers. Yeah. And so that non-violent tradition, which, Tolstoy got it from the Sermon on the Mount, who then passed it on to Gandhi, and obviously Martin Luther King Jr. Used non-violent means. It's not pure non-violence, it is non-violent resistance. So you still find ways of obstructing your enemy, but you absorb the blows in whatever way you can. Yeah. And it's difficult because, as you say, there are all sorts of really dicey situations. And just saying, pray and the Lord will give you wisdom in that moment sounds unconvincing. But... yeah, I recommend people have a look at Stephen Lungu's book.
And the thing, I suppose, about the reason why pacifism can be considered a Christian position is because, in a sense, you can non-violently put yourself in harm's way, be a non-combatant in that sense, but receive, the strikes, the injuries, in order to protect, and yet still choose not to strike back, and that feels like a much more of a Sermon on the Mount approach. approach.
Some
Whereas
1 Peter 2, yeah.
I'm not going to go, and fight because I think it's wrong, but obviously everyone else is going to go and do it.
Everyone else can. At which point the hero becomes like the Hacksaw Ridge guy, who was that guy who ends up saving like dozens of people by being a stretcher bearer. So he was a conscientious objector during World War II, and he ends up putting himself in harm's way and saves so many lives.
Yeah.
So the conscientious objector who just wants to dodge the draft is not the same thing as the one who becomes the stretcher bearer and puts themselves on the line in that kind of sense.
And there's actually quite a strong tradition of people doing that. So J. Gresham Machen, so he went to what would have been the First World War with the YMCA or something like that. I mean, this is like, whoa, okay, they're involved. It was a very different organization back then. Wasn't so much, air-conditioned gyms or anything like that.
Wow.
But went as someone who would go and it didn't want to be involved in carrying weapons, and didn't want to be involved in that sort of stuff, but supported sort of allied troops in France, and was doing things like running Bible studies and making hot chocolate and giving out cigarettes and that sort of stuff. And so there was a sense in which as a Christian, you might not go to take up arms, but you could go and serve in a different capacity.
Yes. Now, I mean, so the just war tradition, though, is that Romans 13, the state bears the sword, and it bears the sword for a reason, and the state is allowed to have the monopoly of violence, and the state can force you to do things that private citizens can't force you to do things, and then as state takes on state, then they have the power of the sword, and God has delegated that power of the sword, and so as the states, there can be such a thing as war.
Let's go to Vladimir, the other Vladimir
Vladimir
Zelensky. So I was fascinated by him when I read the first thing I read that was that he had been an actor who'd been in a TV program in Ukraine called Servant of the People. On that show, he had played a history teacher who makes this video sort of having a go at the government. The video goes viral, and this history teacher becomes the president of Ukraine. That show is incredibly popular. Out of the back of it comes Vladimir Zelensky, who, as well as winning Strictly Come Dancing or all these other things, then himself becomes the president of Ukraine in 2019, I think. So you have this fascinating story of this kind of entertainer who rises to the highest role in Ukrainian politics, which is in and of itself, that's a fascinating story, right? We just find that sort of captivating. But not only that, he's then involved in sort of defending Ukraine, and is doing so in such a way that he has become the hero of the story at the moment. Now, before we get into like exactly what it is, why he kind of embodies this kind of archetypal, warrior king kind of thing, I totally appreciate, and there's probably going to be a backlash if there hasn't already been a backlash against the news about him because it's propaganda and none of these stories are really true, and he didn't say that and he didn't do this.
They'll unearth a tweet from 2009.
But the issue, it seems to me, and there was a great reporter for the BBC who talked about this over the weekend. She said, when it comes to war, there is a narrative. There are things that are happening on the ground, the events that are happening, but there are also the symbols. Now, obviously, those symbols can be so distorted from the actual events that it's propaganda and it bears no relation. But we should take it very seriously that these stories have symbols, and the symbols really matter, and they become these kind of unifying principles and narratives behind which people get behind. And so the idea of a prime minister who, whatever his story, he's now the guy who's not going to flee. The president, he's going to say, I'm not going to flee. US offer him safe passage out. And the great line is, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition," which is you couldn't write a better Hollywood action movie.
They did
line.
script it for him. I'm sure of it.
But even if they did, it's the best line, right?
Yeah.
If you're saying, "I am here to defend this city, defend my people," you will see our faces, not our backs, right?
Yes.
When you come. It's
Yes.
like
Yes.
almost whatever else is happening, that the compelling nature of that narrative
Yeah.
is the story. And we can't resist looking for it. And when we find it, we're all so delighted.
Yeah.
Because in a world of such confusion, misinformation, and all this sort of stuff, we want the hero.
Yeah, but precisely because of that, I am just so I just take everything I see in my Twitter
Kinda
feed
sus.
with
That's
a
your view.
total punch of salt. Because
Yeah.
even like the defense secretary was retweeting stuff about Molotov cocktails being thrown at tanks, and they were showing video of it, and it turns out that was from 2014 in Crimea, and just like how because we love the story so much. And how well are Ukraine actually doing? And it's only early days, and in every invasion, it takes weeks and weeks before these things happen. And I just, and are we getting excited by war, by truly terrible things?
So I can and I totally appreciate the fear behind the excitement, and it's almost too powerful a narrative, right? That it makes it entertainment. And we're in a situation where you've got entertainment and politics have already combined to put this guy in the hot seat. But I suppose I'm probably thinking more about the situation from a why do we have a yearning for the hero story that makes us potentially gullible and opens us up to being manipulated by media. But we want this kind of a hero, right? We want he's very relatable, he's approachable. You've been on Saturday Night TV, you're everyone's friend, right? Ant and Dec, right?
Is he Ant or Dec?
They're so approachable.
We don't know which is which anyway. So.
I don't. So there's got to be an approachability, right? That we want our hero to have a shared experience with us and a relatability to us. Hebrews 2, Christ had to be made like his brothers in every way, right? We want that. We also need the competency and the ability to get the job done and do and be an effective person who can do the job. But then we're looking for the character. And if there's anything which is going to communicate a kind of leader that you can get behind, it's the leader who says, we are not going anywhere. We are not going to roll over. This fight is ours, and we take this on. And I think particularly when the West, we're so caught in what we will contribute, right? We'll do the sanctions, right? That's a kind of easy one to do. Are we going to get involved militarily? Probably not. We can only now just kind of sit and watch to see whether these guys manage to hold out. It feels like that's the sort of level we're at, which means that the narrative of it, the entertainment, the story that's being told becomes
we're spectators, and it's spectacle, and that's what's dangerous about it.
I think what people love about Zelensky as well is, I mean, I imagine there's people from all different nations who are looking and saying, who are seeing the way he's acting and are kind of seeing it very positively. I wonder for us here though we're looking at this guy who gets down into the foxhole with you basically. If we're drawing those parallels, he doesn't just sit back in the command center and say, right, you guys sort it out, or here's a few bits to help you. He's down there and everything. And it's that picture of what it means to be a leader who is actually serving. I mean, you said very aptly a few days ago when we were saying we probably need to talk about this, you said he may well be dead by the time we come on air. And that is the case, isn't it? He's actually putting himself in the position where he could die. But I wonder whether it resonates as so much for us as well, because for so long it feels like we haven't seen that kind of leadership
Well,
in our own circles.
But what's so kind of dramatic about this is that you have Putin, who we have watched for a decade or more, put out photograph after photograph of himself either winning judo competitions or riding a horse topless. It's like, this is a David and Goliath situation. And the David guy, most of us have never heard of, right? If you'd ask most people, who was the president of Ukraine, they had no idea. And they would have known Putin. And they would have seen Putin. Oh, he's this big, strong kind of leader. He's militaristic and he kind of gets involved. How does Putin look at the moment? If you just look at the visuals, you see a man sitting 50 feet away from anyone he's having a conversation with.
He's like Howard Hughes, just kind of like retreating into himself. And
it's so theatrical, but it's exactly the. So he wants to project the strongman thing, but Zelensky, in terms of showing off as a strongman, he's winning hands down because this is the guy who apparently says, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. Like
I do believe he said that.
But again, I and that's what's so like, and the frustration. I mean, maybe this is all projecting. The whole thing's just a kind of running confusion on everything. But you can imagine the frustration as Putin wants to be seen in the way that Zelensky is being seen.
Right.
In fact, every world leader wants the numbers that Zelensky's running in terms of.
Well, but when the US say we will airlift you out, how many want to say, I don't need a ride, just give me ammunition? Like on the one hand, I want to be Zelensky. Do I want to be do I want to bear the cost of being Zelensky? No. Yeah. And I wonder, maybe we'll return to this when it gets closer to Palm Sunday, because there's a twist in the tale for the Christ story, absolutely hailed by the crowds.
Yeah.
And yet, who does he really turn against? So he's loved and he takes on the oppressor, the Romans, and yet when he goes into Jerusalem, it's the temple where he overturns the tables and that. Like he's not safe, and and Christ is the ultimate figure, like from Joshua 5, when Joshua goes to the commander of the Lord's host and says, which side are you on? Their side or our side? And he just says, no. Which I think is important to bear in mind, that Christ is, it's not the Bob Dylan song, it's not with God on our side, and he stands against both kinds of machoism.
And as you say, right, so clearly Zelensky is not a Nazi, right? In terms of like Putin wants to cast him as a Nazi.
Yeah.
And his own political situation, his own history, the integrity of his own political standing may well be very complicated. And so there is, again, a fear of rushing to jump behind someone and suddenly finding, oh, well, now you've got to defend everything they've ever thought. And you think, well, no, it's more complicated
He
than
did
that.
have a problematic Instagram back in 2011.
But there is a thing there which says we all look for a narrative, a myth that makes sense of the complex situation. And I think over this weekend, quicker than almost any other narrative I think we've seen form in the public consciousness, this man has risen right to the top and caused all sorts of reactions and further reactions off the back of that, which we'll look at later.
And you're right that actually people want to form this thing, whatever that thing is off the back of this. And actually we've seen that on social media over the last week or so, or particularly since the invasion began, that people have started to link what has gone on to almost everything else you can imagine. So anyone's hobby horse. And actually Thomas has put together a little challenge for us, which we're going to do in a moment. Right, so Thomas, what have you got for us?
Hello. Well, we are about to play the game, What Does the Invasion of Ukraine Prove About My Hobby Horse? and this is based on a Twitter thread compiled by Christopher Snowden. So really important to say we mean this out of no disrespect or insensitivity toward the people of Ukraine. This is really about bemoaning the ways in which the crisis has been used as a tool to make points about unrelated issues. So I'm going to read out a series of issues, and your job is to guess how those issues have been connected to the invasion, and anyone watching, feel free to join in. So are we ready for issue number 1?
I think so, yes.
Yep.
We are
Let's get
reacting
ready.
to reactions to the war.
Here we go.
Yes.
Okay, so the invasion of Ukraine proves that we should adopt a low-carb diet.
Wow. How did... Low carb. So, because Ukraine
Because
are
they have a lot of
massive cane sugar producer? No, I
they
don't
have
know.
a lot of like agricultural land, don't they? So maybe do they grow a lot of crop, and maybe like
And
so
so
it could be used. I don't
the
know.
argument, just let's work this out. The argument then is because we should have a low carb diet. Right?
Oh.
We ought to have a low carb diet.
Yes.
Is that what they're
Are they
saying?
in favor of a
think.
low carb diet? And somehow
Yeah,
the
so that's
situation
their,
in Ukraine supports that position.
yeah, that's it. That's their hobby horse. We all need to eat fewer carbs. How could the
So this-
invasion of Ukraine
This
possibly...
wouldn't have happened if we were eating less carbs. Is basically their thing.
Putin is going into
Who ate
Ukraine
all the pies?
for-
Who ate all the pies?
to harvest.
It's
their
more
food.
kind of how does the crisis mean that, oh, okay, now we get to...
Tommy, you're going to have to put us out.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to get to this.
Everyone has to be put out of misery.
Do they
It's
get
too
easier?
complicated.
yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the tweet. This is a genuine tweet, by the way. If fuel and grain prices surge because of Ukraine, it would be a good time to go green and start a low-carb, gluten-free diet. Smiley face.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fuel prices.
I will
Take
say
advantage.
my mother-in-law
Yes.
has just said
Correct.
much of the world's wheat is grown in the Ukraine. So
Oh.
there
Okay.
you go.
Ah,
It's
interesting.
all related.
Okay. All right. So we're 0 for 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good effort. Good effort. So number 2, the invasion of Ukraine proves that we should be pro-choice.
Proves that we should be pro-choice. Because of the self-definition of the Ukrainians, they ought to be able to determine their own identity, just as a woman ought to have like sovereignty over her own borders and not have another state invade. Is that
Or would it be as advanced as that? Or would it just be like, assuming Putin is a bad guy and he's probably not pro-choice.
okay?
Therefore, if you
Right.
are not pro-choice as well, you're like Putin. Like so,
Right.
everybody should not be like Putin. No.
Yeah. Okay. I've nothing else to add on that.
That's pretty close. So this was the tweet. There is a war in Ukraine, but there is also a war on women in Virginia. There are multiple bills that would restrict access to abortion that are expected to be heard today.
There's a war on
That-
Ukraine, and there's a
Wow.
war on low carb diets, and
Yeah.
like okay, all right.
That is, I think, isn't that the most brilliant example of what about
What about
is
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah. Is that?
Yeah.
This is my favourite example. If we've
Okay.
got time for
Yeah.
We
Yeah, let's
certainly
go.
do.
Let's go. Number 3.
Let's do it.
the invasion of Ukraine proves that we should be anti-cycling,
Oh,
Is it-
anti-cycling.
as in riding bikes. Yeah.
Anti-cycling.
Anti-cycling.
Oh, is it because wasn't there a guy on his bike trying to stop the tanks or something? And therefore, is this guy on the side of Putin and the Russian army, running over cyclists?
I can't think of what would possibly be the link to cycling.
Is it because most bicycles are grown in Ukraine? Is that what's happening?
That must be
And
it.
the cost of bicycles is going to go up.
Is it because the envoys of tanks are all like causing a traffic jam? But if they had cycle paths, they'd be able to bypass the traffic jam. No, I have no idea.
Again, these are all very good ideas, but in a way, you're thinking too hard. I think.
We're thinking too hard.
Yeah.
We're drawing a logical connection.
Okay,
It's just to say,
Putin bad.
it's to say there's a.
Sorry.
Okay.
Is that more?
So someone tweeted a photo of a man riding a bike in Kiev, and there's a tank in the background, and someone commented, "Cyclists think they own the road, even in a war."
Okay.
I think
Wow.
we should do one more. I think
Yeah.
that this segment
Wow.
could be rescued with one more.
Okay, all right. The invasion of Ukraine proves that we should be anti-Brexit.
Oh, so this is the idea that Putin brought Brexit about to destabilize the European Union and NATO and everything else in the world.
And
Or they think the EU would be better off with Boris in it, and then they'd be able to negotiate with Putin with greater power. What?
well, I think people have certainly said that the EU has responded well, and we've been stuck on the outside a little bit more. So
Okay.
maybe we should have been part of it. But then other people have said, like you just said, that
This is
Brexit
Boris's
has been
finest hour.
misinformation has been
Yeah.
seeded by Russia. So
it's all
if
gotta
you
be
voted for Brexit, this is all happening now on
Is
your
it-
heads.
Is it true that there are examples both of pro and anti-Brexit?
I think there are.
Yeah,
I've only got the
yeah.
anti-Brexit ones here, but
Yeah.
yeah, both sides have been made.
both arguments. That's great, isn't it? We can make both arguments from the same information.
Because surely the pro-Brexit argument would be, well, the EU is soft because it lost one of its 28 member states, and so it's not going to do anything to
Okay.
if I mean, I know that Ukraine's not a member of the EU, but if they lose, Ukraine, the EU's not going to do anything because they lost Britain. I mean,
Haven't they
it's
just joined?
not the worst argument we've heard tonight.
I think Ukraine have just
I
asked
don't think
for
they were in the EU.
like an
Ukraine.
immediate
That's what I'm saying.
involvement in
just
the
joined
EU.
tonight.
They want to join.
Oh, tonight.
Well, they
Yeah.
literally, I mean,
All
it's
right.
that easy to get back in apparently.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
Well, Australia in Eurovision, so it's all up for grabs.
Okay, well, again, very good guesses there. This is the tweet. Dominic Cummings, Aaron Banks, Nigel Farage, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, and all those Brexiters. Look what you did.
well, you can't argue with logic like that. Can
Wow.
you? Watertight.
You invaded a
Look
sovereign
What
nation.
you did.
Look what you did.
Oh goodness me.
I
What
bet,
you've done.
I bet that tweeter just tweets that out about every fortnight.
Yeah.
Just no matter what's in there.
So at some point, it will catch
Yeah.
some traction.
Mhm.
Dear me.
Well, that's all we have from What Does the Invasion of Ukraine Prove About My Hobby Horse?
Wow.
So, thank you very much. Good
Wow.
effort.
But that's, I mean, yeah. Well, thanks, Thomas, for doing that. But it is a case, isn't it, that so many people have leapt on this and been like, "This just goes to show my thing that I've
Yeah.
been saying all along was right."
Yeah.
And conceivably, probably not those. There probably are some things which, there may have been some stuff in truth in, but there's probably also a time and a place,
Yeah.
to be starting to have those discussions
Yeah.
as well. So,
Yeah.
do we want to look at a couple of comments from people?
Yeah, go on.
So Paul Blackham commented when we were talking about pacifism. He said it's not that the pacifist does nothing; they simply exclude one set of options, and doing that seems to open up even more radical possibilities.
There you go. Thank you, Paul Blackham. Yeah, hello.
And then we had a comment from Lisa Daly. I'm going to say Fryer. Apologies if I'm getting that wrong. She says, Lisa, unfortunately the comment is so long I can't actually read it all. I assumed it would
What
all
are the
appear.
highlights?
So we'll go on to your comment section. We will pick that up on Facebook, though. I was so ready for it.
Good effort,
Like-
Lisa.
I was like, when I click on it, I'll be able to read the end of it.
Yeah.
But there are lots of people kind of just chipping in with things here. So guys, do let us know because you may be watching this or listening to this later. Do keep commenting and let us know what you think is going on in the situation. Of course, do be praying for the people of Ukraine and indeed for the people of Russia. And we're called to pray for. I suppose when I'm saying pray for the people of Russia, we're praying for the population there who are. At least there are reports that many are not behind this.
Oh, yeah.
But we're also called to pray for enemies.
Yeah.
And so, we want to pray that people like Putin himself and those who are actually carrying these things out would, repent of what they're doing, would turn back, would be talked down from whatever's going on. And, it sounds trite, doesn't it, to say, and let's pray that Putin turns to the Lord. But
It's
who
happened
knows?
before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had the story of people going to bomb
Yeah.
a meeting.
Yeah.
And, turning to the Lord there.
Yeah, yeah. And Nebuchadnezzar, we were having to think about him this morning. He is a man who was humbled and...
Yeah. And what complicates the situation is, I think, was it a Giles Fraser article?
Mm-hmm.
His article didn't complicate the situation. Rephrase that. So Giles Fraser had an article in Unheard, I think it was, just looking at some of the religious history of Russia and Ukraine, and talking about Putin's actually sees this as part of a religious or spiritual exercise. There is for him a religious element to what he's trying to achieve, and the challenge is that is so tied up with all these completely nonsensical ideas about what the kingdom of the Lord looks like. But that is almost like he's so close, and the blindness to the reality of the way of Jesus is so clear.
Yeah. Well, men never do evil so cheerfully as when they do it for a religious reason.
Yeah.
Blaise Pascal kind of said that, and what's interesting is we in the West have difficulty to take him seriously when he talks about the spiritual space that Ukraine occupies and that Russia is meant to also share that same spiritual space. And we can't help but think that's just a cynical cover for his political grab.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, no, actually, most of the world and most of history have been motivated by things like that. I don't think it's the way of Jesus at all, but it's a religious way of thinking. But that's a register that we don't really think in the West.
No.
Yes, and his, it goes back again to that. I was going to say Armstrong and Miller, but it's not. David Mitchell and Webb and the "Are we the baddies" thing, and the question of whether someone thinks of themselves as doing a righteous deed when in fact they're committing the most outrageous evil, and particularly as you said at the beginning, the language is around unity, right? This is about unity.
Yeah.
This is about unifying the people together again, and not having these divisions and drawing lines between people. And you're like, no, we do actually believe in national
sovereign
lines
states and
nation states. So I suppose that's a way in which falsehood is so it deceives because it can be presented so.
Yeah, everyone always has causes for war.
Rightly,
Even Aristotle would present it in ever such a philosophical way. If you need slaves, here's a just cause for war. If you need some stuff, go and nick it. It's a just cause for war. And Putin's speech was this long, meandering, rambling thing. I set myself the task of actually, reading this thing, and it's just you go cross-eyed, like looking at his justification. Everyone's got justifications. No one thinks they're doing the wrong thing. You're like, no one thinks they're the baddies.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we could talk about this for hours more because there's going to be lots to unpack. But I'm sure the reality is that we will be talking about this on subsequent weeks because this is something that's going to roll on and on and on. But you may have seen, if you've been watching the Speakeasy over the last maybe 5 or so weeks, we were doing a little series each week where we looked at a film. And we said last week we're going to rest that for a while because we're just coming up to the period of Lent. And so we've got a new little section for you, which we'll have a look at in a moment.
Speakeasy.
So we are a few days away from the beginning of Lent. Is that right? Is it?
We're about
Wednesday?
to get ashed, aren't we?
Yeah. Well,
ashed on Wednesday.
Getting some pancakes
Tomorrow's
tomorrow.
Fat Tuesday. Isn't that so? Like in French? In French, it's Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
But it's literally Fat Tuesday.
Fat
I'm
Tuesday.
looking forward to Fat Tuesday.
so
Shrove Tuesday.
Where
we
should be
shriving,
shriven.
yes.
So isn't Shrove Tuesday is interesting because to shrive is to be kind of humbled, right? And it's this idea that you need to be like humbled in order to prepare yourself for a penitential season in the church's calendar that prepares you for Good Friday, where you'll really fast, and then you get to Easter Sunday. But that's that's the way Lent has kind of developed over the years, and
So we've got this series for Lent that we're doing where we've decided we're going to take a bit of a look at the Apostles' Creed.
Yep.
So over the next sort of 6 weeks, we're going to kind of go through that.
Yep.
What is Lent all about, though?
So it is a period of testing. It's 40 days. There are also 6 Sundays, so it's actually 46 days from Ash Wednesday to Easter Sunday. And there are other feast days like St. Patrick's Day that sort of happens in the middle of it. But it's 40 days of preparation, 40 days of testing. Mm-hmm. And it's a corporate kind of a fast as well, which is interesting because like what we tend to think of these days is I'm going to give up carbs for Lent and you're going to give up wine and somebody else is going to, give up exercise. I'm going to give up reading or like whatever it is. And we all have our little bespoke Lent experiences. And it sort of expresses something about the complicated splendor that is me. Mm-hmm. And my Lent will be like this and your Lent. Whereas like I think the church practice has been, we all do it. It's all like the whole town does it, right? Like in chocolat, like the whole town does not have chocolate, which is why it's such a such an asteroid falling on the town for the woman to open up the chocolate shop. But yeah, it is a time of testing and preparation for the feast that is Easter, which, I mean, to my mind, it does get things the wrong way around. I think in the Old Testament, you had Passover first, and then you had the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where you scoured your house for yeast, which was a symbol that you didn't want to actually leave Egypt. You wanted to wait for your bread to rise. And so spiritually you'd look at, for 7 days you would look at aspects of your life that were compromised, and you're leading the old life even though you want to claim the blood of the Passover lamb. So interestingly, in the Old Testament, that kind of self-examination happened after you celebrated the redemption of the lamb, whereas we do it for 46 days, before the redemption, which I think is the wrong way around. But I think there's all sorts of good things about Lent too. Yeah. And the reason why the Apostles' Creed is it developed as this preparation for baptism, because one of the things that happened on Easter Sunday is you do all your baptisms on Easter Sunday, and so you'd have hundreds of people getting baptized in Rome. You'd have hundreds of people getting baptized, and so you'd actually fit in like 128 hours of discipleship training over 7 weeks. 3 hours a day for 6 days a week. You'd really drill people in Bible and theology and apologetics and Christian living and prayer. And one of the things that gets kind of collated out of that is, as you do your doctrine together, here's what we believe. I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. And so the creed kind of came out of that and goes back to sort of the 2nd century and perhaps earlier.
Mm-hmm. Were you going to say something? I thought you were going to say something.
No, I'd always thought Apostles' Creed was the guy who got killed by Ivan Drago.
A lot of people think that. Yeah.
Of course, I'm joking.
So the Apostles' Creed opens with the lines you've just said, Glenn. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. So that's the little bit we're looking at today.
Yep. Yeah.
What do we want to draw out from this?
I don't know. Lots of things. What do you want to draw out from it, Paul?
Well, I think it's interesting that it obviously starts with God. But I thought it was interesting the first way God is defined is as Father. And I think, I can't remember I was going to say I can't remember the name of the book, but I can remember the name of the book now. It was, I think it's Good God, Mike Reeves. He talks about this, how actually that ought to be the first defining thing about God. A lot of people would like to define God as creator, but actually what he draws out is that if we're saying God at his very core is creator, then who is God before he creates?
Right.
And that kind of creates an issue. Whereas actually when we say, well, God is Father and he has always been Father, that's pointing us to something else as well about the kind of stuff you talk about, Glenn, about what was there at the beginning, love.
Right.
Because we have persons, 3 persons united in love. Yeah. So it's already pointing us towards these relationships of the Trinity. And of course, the whole creed has this Trinitarian thing through it anine. But
that's good. I was reflecting on that with the Lord's Prayer recently, that it starts with our Father in heaven, and it finishes with, thine be the kingdom, the power, and the glory. And I think a lot of theologies begin with, thine be the kingdom, the power, and the glory, and they get to Father later. And I think there's something very important about not only the Lord's Prayer, but the Creed sort of beginning with Father, because as soon as you say Father, well, it implies Son and Spirit,
And there was a book, the title of which was "I Dared to Call Him Father."
Right. Bilquist Shake.
can't remember who it's by, but I thought that was a fascinating one, because in what other religion or in what other faith can you say, I believe in God, Father?
Right.
Now, maybe the ancient Norse myths might go, well, Odin is the All-Father or something like that.
Yeah.
But in terms of a distinction you're making from the outset, now, how is he Father to you? How is he your Father? There's a whole gospel to unpack there about, being in his Son and beloved as his Son. But yeah, fascinating that that's the early church wants the people to know in their preparation. God, when you think God, think Father.
Right.
That's your first port of call.
Yes.
God as Father.
And you've often used that in your evangelism, haven't you? That you'd say to people, when you picture God, what do you think? What do you think of in your head? And you say, it's probably the old man sitting on a throne somewhere, high on power, low on personality, all those things. And it's this solitary figure. But actually, straight away, here we're being confronted with, as you said, there's the Father. Therefore, Father of who? What's going on there?
Yeah.
Which completely tears apart most people's preconception of who they think God might be or what God might be like.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you might kind of look at the creed and kind of think, well, how on earth is this really going to be relevant for us? But even in just that kind of basic day-to-day conversation with people about who is God, right from the off, I think that's super useful.
Yeah. This is the God that Jesus introduces you to, and that's what the creed is doing. The creed is saying, here is the God that Jesus introduces you to. In Luke 11, verse 1, the disciples see Jesus praying, and they say, that looks great. Can we come in on prayer?
Yeah.
How do we pray? And Jesus says, when you pray, Father. Which is just awesome, because from before the foundation of the world, Christ, the eternal Son, has been saying, my Father, my Father, my Father, my Father. And then the disciples say, can we come in on this? He's like, yeah, sure. Yeah. In my name. Now you say, our Father, our Father, our Father, our Father.
And that is the corrective to the appropriate sensitivity for those whose earthly fathers have been awful.
Right.
For whom sometimes people say things like, oh, well, so we don't like to talk in those terms about God because it's quite a problematic term for some people. But what we're saying is that the right approach to that is not to say, let's not use the category of Father. Let's actually see the right fatherhood of God and receive or accept Jesus' invitation that we can pray in his name to his Father because they have the union.
Yeah, and it's coming that way down. So it's not judge God by your dad.
Yeah.
Which would be a terrible thing for even if you've got the best dad.
Sure.
God is not just like your dad, but a bit more powerful. Like that would be horrendous. No matter how good it's not judge God by your dad. It's at some point judge your dad by God. Right? And it's that way. That's way around. And then I think that it's picking up on 1 Corinthians 8 language. There are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom all things come and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we exist. And so that kind of designation throughout the Bible, when it says God, mostly you're probably thinking Father, although that's not always the case. And when it says Lord, mostly you're thinking Son, although that's not always the case. And the Creed kind of picks that up, and it's got these sort of 4 articles. I believe in God the Father. I believe in Jesus Christ, his Son, our Lord. I believe in the Holy Spirit. And then I believe in the church and all the rest of that stuff. There's those sort of 4 articles. It kind of beautifully flows from Father, Son, Spirit to the church and everything that we have in the church.
So God is firstly here described as Father, and then it goes on to say Creator of heaven and earth, which I suppose you picked up there on that Corinthians language, from whom all things come. So
the source of all being, which as we're thinking about, here's little Putin, right? And here is the fountain of life, from whom all things have come. And he really directs a king's heart like a watercourse. Yeah. Like really, the God we are talking about, the creator of heaven and earth, such that when we say, a response to the invasion of Ukraine is to pray, that's not a little thing, you know, and it's not a token thing.
Yeah.
it's like literally, if you believe, you know, if you believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, like, of course the very first thing you do is when little Putin does his little warmongering, you go to the big daddy. you go to your Father in heaven, creator of heaven and earth, absolute source of all life and being, before whom we all must bow. It puts things in such perspective.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Nate? Or?
I'm just going to say, I think the creator stuff is right there in terms of, you know, lots of what we've talked about here at Speak Life, and think about the Foundry and, you know, the School of Creative Evangelism. And you can, I think there is so much to unpack from every word of the Apostles' Creed. But one of the things is that we can become sort of bogged down in, okay, there's a kind of important truths, deep, you know, kind of things that we've got to hold on to, or that you hold on to in the face of chaos and confusion and all the stuff that's going on. But wonderfully, because he's creator of heaven and earth, that's not only this, okay, he's sovereign, he's in charge, and he's, you know, he's big and strong, and you have a father-child relationship, but he's the creator of everything. Like, think of all the things. Like, there's loads of them.
Wait. Okay, yeah.
Give me a minute.
All things, right? All things considered, right? Like, that's incredible, right? So, so just the ability for Christians to genuinely enjoy creation, and to find in it, you know, a doxology as they look at amazing things and just think, Father Almighty, you creator of heaven and earth. Just like, wow, like, and so the thrillmanship, right? The thrillmanship is the weirdest word I know, right? But the thrillmanship of saying, this is my Father's world, right? It's just amazing. It's just such an encouragement and such a delight, rather than, you know, rightly in the context of events of, you know, of the weekend, you need to have something very firm to hold on to. You need to have something that really does set everything else in context. But same too, there are aspects of the beauty of God's creation which can be enjoyed even in the midst of utter chaos and confusion. So I was talking to Barry Cooper was down over the weekend, and we were talking about the Terrence Malick film A Hidden Life, which is a fascinating film. If you can cope with it, it's a Terrence Malick film. But in terms of beauty and thinking through some big issues about confronting issues of war and loyalty and nationhood and all that sort of stuff. And there's just this wonderful moment. There's this character who is basically condemned to die. And as he walks out of this shop, he knocks over an umbrella. And he just stops, picks up the umbrella, sets it right, and walks out. And there's something there about the fact that Father Almighty is creator of heaven and earth, which means that in the face of your own execution, you can set the world,
everything
just
matters
that little bit right. It all counts.
Like Luther was asked, what would you do if you knew that tomorrow Jesus is returning? What would you do? He said, I'd plant a tree. Like, it's that kind of thing. It's like, what? But that assumes so much about the world and the life of the world to come, and the fact that it's a fathered world, an intended world, a good world, which you don't get in the ancient Near Eastern myths, you don't get in the Greek myths, you don't get in the Roman myths, you don't even get in Islam, because God is not father over a world that he is going to be engaged with. He always remains imprisoned by his own transcendence and infinitely distant from it. So you only get this view of creation with the Jesus God. The God who introduces to a father who loves this world and has great intentions for this world. So of course you put the umbrella back and you plant the tree because it's loved and it has a future.
Well, lots of good stuff coming out of there, and there'll be lots more to pull out of the creed over the next few weeks as well. Hope you found it kind of encouraging. We're going to be here every Monday, 8 o'clock. So if you've not joined us before, but you tuned in tonight, we'd love to see you back next week. We're always kind of talking about different issues going on. As I said, lightly, we will be talking about some of the things we've talked about tonight. And the things that are going on as that unfolds over the next few weeks as well. But we will be going back through the creed through Lent. So if you might find that a useful thing as well, and maybe point other people in the direction of the Speakeasy, you can find us both on YouTube and on Facebook. And you can always watch this after the event as well. So you can go back on YouTube or onto Facebook and watch it again. So guys, thank you for joining us. Thank you for the conversation, guys. It's been really good. And let's all keep praying for people in the Ukraine and Russia as well. Take care.
God bless. Bye.
Good night.